Hi everyone, I'm going to talk about pruning roses and give a little rose demonstration on how to prune. End of January, beginning of February, into February is the time to prune your roses in zone 9, which I am. The reason to prune roses is to just sort of, get them revitalized so they have bigger blooms, thin out the dead, and just open them up, because any open canopy on any plant is, natural predators will get in there and get harmful bugs, light, air. It just makes for a healthier plant and bigger blooms in this case. My last property, I had so many roses and I would never get to pruning them every year, so I actually pruned them every other year and they were perfectly fine. What I would do is just that second year I would prune them pretty far down. But if you can, every year, it's a good idea to prune your roses. Now, some roses don't need pruning, like, the landscape roses. They don't really need pruning. And if you do have an old-fashioned rose that only blooms once in spring, don't prune those now. Wait till they bloom and then prune them. If you prune them now, you run the risk of pruning off their buds and you might not get any blooms. But for most roses that are continuous bloomers, repeat bloomers, now is the time to prune. You do want to wait for a bit of dry weather, just because you don't want open wounds to have rain falling on them. Some of my go-to tools, long-handled loppers, of course, so you could reach in there without scratching yourself up. Long gloves, leather gloves, and a nice pair of sort of bypass pruners like Felco's or Coronas. And I'm just going to go ahead and demonstrate this. So I'm going to drop down. Now this rose I moved out of a pot and just planted now. That's why the soil looks a little undisturbed. The graft isn't as happy as I liking it. I actually don't like grafted roses, but it's getting harder and harder to find roses that are on their own roots. Of course, you could take rose cuttings for most roses, but you have to start with an initial plant. So, but right now we're going to focus on the pruning. So the number one thing is to prune out the dead. So I'm just going to drop on down here. When I say dead, sometimes it's very obvious, like it will be brown and brittle. When in doubt, you could always scrape the bark a little bit, and if it's green underneath, that means it's still alive, but this is obviously pretty dead. So you do want to remove the dead, and so I'm just going to start pruning the dead off. Let's hope I could get through this with my pruners. You always want to prune back pretty close to another growth point. Yeah, it's definitely dead there. You could see how it's splintering there, and ideally that would be a little bit more clean. There we go. It's going to keep going until hopefully I have a little clean, but that's as good as it gets there. Something else that you are going to want to remove instead of, besides dead, are, the idea is to have a really nice scaffolding structure, evenly spaced canes, i.e. branches, around. And you're going to want to remove anything that's growing inwards. You want a lot of outward growth. So when you're pruning, you want to prune to an outward facing bud. And I like to drop my roses pretty far down. And of course you want to have them sort of all equal and avoid crossing. So I'm just going to start pruning this. I may say a few things. And then I'll just show you, the after. There's not a lot of growth on this plant. Sometimes you get into a rose and there's tons of growth. This is pretty sparse as far as a rose go. It was young. It wasn't super happy in its pot. And, but here, I'm just going to go ahead and prune and we'll see. Now that's pretty much it. Everyone prunes differently, but the idea is to remove the dead, the inward growing branches, the crossing, to open it up so you have the main canes. Of course, to remove anything that's coming below the graft line, but that could be done, that should be done throughout the whole entire year. Ideally, you're going to prune at an angle so the moisture will run off in case it does rain, and prune as close as you can to the outward facing bud. You don't need to put in a wound seal. If you do correct clean cuts, it'll be fine. But yeah, this rose will make it. It's not the healthiest rose, but that's the perfect reason to prune, is to help boost it and revitalize it, get rid of the old, thin it out. More energy will go to individual canes, more energy will go to individual blooms, and then instead of sort of sparsing itself out. So that's what it looks like. And hopefully that's gonna help you prune your roses.